G'day YouTube, Warbles on a lot here with the second part of Outsiders. Maybe it's first Moondog, I don't know, we will see.
It was a local haka version almost. And Melissa Singer, you're a Swans fan, you must have done you proud.
Yeah, I caught those minutes of the game, and look, I think because it was Adam Goodes and not some other player, it's prompted this reaction. And I think I was a bit torn as a Swans supporter and as an observer of football and culture and news, in that I thought, oh, you know, good on him. He's polarising. A lot of people don't like him. He's a great champion. But part of me thought, here we go again. Because when Adam Goodes stands up either to express himself culturally and his Indigenous background, there's invariably, you know, this polarising, often quite angry and negative reaction on social media. And to see it being discussed whether it's an appropriate celebration gesture. I mean, personally, when Usain Bolt does his victory salute, I think he looks quite silly. But, you know, if you really want to reduce it, it is essentially the same thing. But because it's Adam Goodes and because it's associated with Aboriginal culture, it automatically prompts this, you know, this great outcry.
This is the thing, isn't it, Miriam Lyons? Here we have the Indigenous round of AFL. We're talking about reconciliation on this weekend, and yet if a Black Australian does something provocative, that can't be part of our discussion on reconciliation, can it? But surely you're not angry.
Oh, look, I think that the reaction to this is a total beat up. As Good said, would there be an outcry about Maori players performing the haka? No, of course there wouldn't. You know, I mean, maybe the ARL needs to bring back the Biff campaign. I mean, this is sport, right? You know, it's just ridiculous. You know, there's a theory that Tom Wills, who founded the game in the 1860s, may have developed it from watching Aboriginal games at the time. You know, 12% of AFL players are Indigenous. If you can't have, you know, like some kind of cultural expression on the field in a competitive sport, what on earth are we doing? Well, you know, it really, I mean, this is, you know, got a bit of history where Adam Goodes, you know, stands up for himself or, you know, stands up to abuse. You know, there has been an overreaction to this in the past. And, you know, I just kind of hope we get over it.
Yeah, well, I think it will. The conversation rattles along on the front pages of some of the papers today, and I'm sure there will be more commentary. And you can catch that video if you just whack Adam Goodes celebration into your YouTube of choice. You'll find it.
And plenty of parodies too.
Well, that is inevitable, and some of them may involve cats in the fullness of time. Thanks to our outsiders this morning, Dr. Mark Banish, his new book, Queensland, Everything You Ever Wanted to Know But Were Afraid to Know. It's out in New South. Miriam Lyons, policy analyst, her new book, Governomics, out now through MUP. And Melissa Singer, weekend news editor, news director, excuse me, Melissa, for The Age. They have been your outsiders. More of that next week. As it comes up to 10 o'clock, that's it for Sunday Extra today.
Okay, well, no first Moondog, as I thought may be the case. It is a bit scary that Barneybaby Joyce, my local member of Parliament, is standing up to Tony Abbott and defending human rights. That is really worrying. It seems to me that there's a feedback loop going on between politicians and the security industry, as in federal police, state police, private security guards, where what goes on is the police are being put in charge of dreaming up their own wish list. The politician says to the policeman, what would you like to have more money to worry about next? And the policeman says, oh, well, you know, like, what happens if somebody goes overseas and fights in one of these ragtag revolutionary insurgencies and becomes depersonalised and brutalised, and then they come back to Australia and they go fizz bang pop and they import the conflict back to Australia. We want to stop them from coming back. We want to say that if they've got overseas citizenship and Australian citizenship, we want to revoke their Australian citizenship. We don't want them to be people at all because they're basically un-Australian. And it seems that there's this firm belief in the security industry and a big chunk of the political industry that anybody who disagrees with any policy that can be tagged as law and order or safety or security oriented, they are automatically a threat. They don't deserve to have human rights because they disagree with the government and they disagree with having stronger and stronger and more security laws, funding, hoops for people to jump through. And the police get their new funding, they get their new laws. Somebody actually comes under their scrutiny, and the simple fact that they found somebody to arrest is then automatically assumed to be justification for a requirement to strengthen the laws yet again. It's like no law that they ever apply is ever considered to be strong enough by the farces of law and order. And I just wonder how long it's going to be before these right-wing lunatics decide that because somebody has committed a crime, they no longer deserve to be called Australian citizens, and therefore none of the previous rights that citizens of the nation have been able to assume, none of those rights apply any longer. As they said in the discussion, Ivan Milat has Australian citizenship, and by the sound of it, he's probably got citizenship from somewhere else as well. So he might have dual citizenship. So yeah, if he had gone over to Syria, they could have said he's not an Australian because he only killed people for fun, not for politics. Therefore, he's still a citizen. Is that where the Prime Minister's going? I cannot help but regard the direction that the Australian government is intent, stubbornly intent on travelling down, is going to do nothing but foment discontent within the nation. I seem to recall that there was a bunch of Australians in the 1930s went and joined the International Brigade to fight against fascism in Spain. When they lost, they came back. A lot of them were traumatised. Some of them have been wounded. A bunch of them didn't come back because they got killed. But not one of them started a revolution in Australia when they got back. The only people who was trying to start revolutions in Australia back in the 1920s and 30s was the New Guard, a bunch of right-wing businessmen with some war veterans mixed in. They were going to have a fascist takeover of inland Victoria and New South Wales. It wasn't the people who'd gone off to fight in an insurgency. I can remember during the Vietnam War, there were people who'd been conscripted, all volunteered, gone off and had their taste of Southeast Asian war. They came back to Australia and America and they formed a Veterans Against the War movement, which used to put on big protests and attend protests and all the rest of it. I would say that making the assumption that anybody who goes overseas and gets a bit of reality awareness therapy applied to their beau jest fantasies is automatically going to come back to Australia and commit mayhem. It's an extraordinarily baseless assumption. There isn't a great deal of evidence to back it. How many of the people who volunteered to go to Iraq and fight on the side of the Western Alliance How many of them came back from Iraq or Afghanistan and decided to use their skill at maintaining and operating and deploying death machines and violence against the Australian population who paid the taxes and supported the government which ordered them to go over there and become traumatised in a war that really didn't make a great deal of sense? We haven't had any big outbreak of crazy Afghan veterans shooting up Parliament House or throwing hand grenades at recruiting stations. That hasn't happened. So why is it assumed that some keyboard warrior who fudges his parents' holiday plans so that he can finish up in Turkey, crossing the border into Syria so that he can go on a great big adventure, why is it that when he gets a gutful and decides that he really doesn't want to be doing this and he'd like to go home and sort of lick his wounds and rethink things, why have we got to demonise them and uncountry them? There is no sense to the policy that the Australian government is intent on pursuing. It's a collection of methods that are guaranteed to make everything worse. And at the moment, the Australian military, like the American military, is wearing itself down to a bloody stump, grinding sand into the gearbox, messing around in the desert on the other side of the world, while there's a place called the Spratly Islands where the Chinese keep pouring sand and cement onto what used to be a tidal mudflat, and they're building an airbase. Has anybody noticed that China has not spent 25 years making a mess of whatever military they might have, traumatising their young men and young women by getting to play hopscotch in the minefields in Afghanistan? Chinese military might be in pretty good shape compared to America and Australia. And China's our biggest trading partner. And America and China seem lined up to have a fight when America's pretty much in decline. I don't see America being able to put enough drones in the skies over China to sway things America's way if they do decide to come to blows. And I really think that it won't be too long before expressing political dissent in the way that I am doing today will be labelled un-Australian activity, and I will face some kind of sanction for expressing my opinion that Tony Abbott is a dangerous cretin. He really is. He's in the category of you have to forgive him because he knows not what he does. He apparently cannot encompass the idea that he is wrong in anything that he does. If it feels good to him, that's all that matters to him. He doesn't need to examine it. He doesn't need to get all empathic about how might I feel if I was on some other side of the debate. It feels good to him, and he's a half-trained Jesuit priestling, and he's got God on his side, so whatever he wants to do has been ticked off in heaven. And it's probably foreordained, so it was okay before he even thought of it. And he wants there to be un-Australians who can be stripped of their citizenship because they have not only gone and fought, but they have supported a foreign terrorist insurgency. I've got to say, I'm really glad that I'm a pacifist. So far, they haven't made it compulsory to support war. A person is still entitled to say, no. War's wrong, all war's wrong, it always makes things worse, therefore I'm not going to support it, and I don't care what your justification or your rationalisation is, I'm not interested in killing somebody because a politician said so. It's still legal to speak like that, but we don't know how long it's going to remain legal. Warbles on a lot to YouTube on the upload limit. Ciao.